I'll always tell it like it is, that's the bottom line. If you just living to exist, you on borrowed time. Don't ever let them take your soul, no, no, no. Don't ever let them take your soul, no, no, no. I'll always tell it like it is, that's the bottom line. If you just living to exist, you on borrowed time. Don't ever let them take your soul, no, no, no. Don't ever let them take your soul, no, no, no. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. Yeah, that's the bottom. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. I changed my life for the better.
To ask them, and they knew about his drug use, okay, and they knew about the crack, okay, and they had been offering to help him, you might say, okay, because by the way, now they were drug users too, but they wasn't doing crack, okay, but they offered to help him, so he called them and asked for help. Only one of them was sleeping, didn't answer the phone, and the other one was at work, and then he left a message. Now, 5 minutes after Danny left the house that night, one of his friends called. Danny had just left. So again, you know, I mean, I know he might have went out the next night or something, but if he'd have reached that friend that night, they were going to go out and maybe shoot pool or drink a beer to help him with the cravings that he had admitted to them. Mm-hmm. Of course, I didn't find out that till later. Another thing he did that night, I had told him, I said, well, you're depressed, son. I said, when I go back to the drugstore, I had a couple of days before I had to go back to the drugstore. I said, I'll get you some Prozac and I'll get you some, and I said, in the meantime, you can take Benadryl and you can drink a beer to help you sleep, because he was telling me he had trouble sleeping. Okay. Well, I didn't know this either, but when he left that night, by the way, he came to our room, because it was a custom that he would tell us, even though he was 22 years old and he was still living with us, he would usually come to tell us where he was going. That was the kind of relationship we had. So he came and he said, Dad, I'm going by such and such house. I don't remember the kid's name, or a friend's house. And I got to get some notes for a test that I'm taking tomorrow in school. He was going to community college. And so I think he also said, I love you. And we said, I love you. And then bingo, we never saw him again alive. But he left. But before he left, I found out too earlier that evening, he'd asked my sister if she knew where the Benadryl was. She didn't tell me that after he was gone. And I went and looked. I said, well, why couldn't they find the Benadryl? Well, it was right in the cabinet that he was looking in, but it was labeled with the generic name, diphenhydramine. And he didn't recognize that was Benadryl. So, you know, this is a lot of tearjerk stories, but this is reality. This is what my son went through that night, trying not to go. Mm. But he went, okay, and he got murdered, okay, and it's a long explanation of exactly what happened that night. I don't think we necessarily have to go in that. Not that I'm against going into it. If you really want me to, I could. But he was in the wrong place at the wrong time that night. He did nothing to provoke his death. Okay, mm-hmm. But the killer also, in all fairness, I think really was young and loaded and got confused and felt fear and overreacted with a kid that wasn't about to do anything to him, but I think he might have suspected that. And so supposedly the killer was supposed to be firing a warning shot, and I don't know if that's true or not, but if it's possible. And there was a couple other freaky things that happened. Danny tried to throw his arm up, apparently seeing the gun, and the bullet hit his arm and ricocheted into his head. So if maybe if he wouldn't have thrown his arm up, maybe the bullet would have missed him. Okay. The other thing he tried to do is he tried to throw himself out of the way, and his seat belt caught him. You know how if you move real quick with a B-cell, yeah. Okay, grabs you. And the cops were amazed at that, because none of the kids that ever dealt up there were wearing their seat belts, which again tells you something about him, but it also tells you that his head wasn't right, okay? Right. You put a seatbelt on, then you go up to a place at 12 o'clock at night where people are getting shot every so often, you know. But in all those circumstances, he's dead. Okay, and so the next thing that happened, and it's part of the story, is I started exploring what the hell happened. You know, I call his friends in. Okay. Well, excuse me. First, I got a funeral to deal with, which is crazy. Okay, and picking out coffins, and I picked out the coffin by the color of the lana. His favorite color was blue. I didn't care whether it cost $2,000 or cost $10,000. I said I want that one because it's got a blue lana. And so we had to lay him out, and we went and saw him before because we was afraid he wouldn't look good because he'd gotten shot in the head. But it was a miracle that you couldn't tell he had been shot. It went in through his ear, didn't come out and whatnot. And I think he had a little bruise around one of his eyes, but they pretty much covered that up with makeup. And he looked like he was sleeping. He really did. And, you know, I worked on a eulogy. And, of course, the other crazy thing is I was even still writing his eulogy or revising it while I was at the funeral, sitting in the back of the room. After I had stood and greeted a lot of people, I went in the back because I knew I had to read this eulogy, and I didn't know whether I was strong enough to read it. And I was still revising it. And in the eulogy, I incorporated something that I probably wouldn't have, but his girlfriend came to me right after his death, and she said, "Mr. Danny," I said, "did you know that Danny wrote a lot?" I said, "Well, I knew he kind of did." She said, "No, he wrote a lot." And I said, "Well," she said, "Let me show you." So I went up in a room, and she dug through some stuff that she knew that I didn't know. And we found a lot of his writings, okay? And one struck me in particular, and it was a poem titled 12:01 a.m., okay? And it's crazy, but it's kind of almost like it describes what happened to him that night in his demise, Danny's, but also what happened to the killer that night in his almost demise. I know that sounds strange, and some people would probably say, "Oh, you're just weird," you know, okay, but
right.
I suggest that you read the poem and make your own decision on that, okay? It's titled 12:01 a.m. Danny was pronounced dead at 12:08 a.m. He died a little bit before that, okay? Near 12:01 a.m. It starts off, "Wrong turn, life burns. It's like a mystery story." That's the first 3 lines of the poem. The parents of his killer pay a high price of admission to watch his pain, so everyone claims. A flip of the switch in the dark of the night, a cry in the distance, a life taken for spite. Next, something like a producer promotes a blockbuster hit. And at the end it says, "But in life, this story doesn't fit," or does it? Now, that's not all the lines of the poem, okay? I'll get you a copy of it, okay? But it's really weird, okay? And it told me something. It reminded me that I'd had a conversation with my son about God and about the death penalty. My son came to me, again, I'm going backwards now, but my son came to me a couple of years before, and he said, "Dad, I think I'm an atheist." And I said, "Well, talk to me about it." He said, "Well, you know, I want to believe in God, and I think there's a God. I want there to be a God, but you know, I just can't buy the whole story." Okay. And I said, "Well, Dave, look, Danny, join the club." I said, "I've been a doubter most of my life." Okay. I wouldn't call yourself an atheist. I'd call yourself maybe agnostic at this point, but you're young, you're exploring. Okay. So he comes to me a couple of days later and he says, "You're right, Daddy, I'm an agnostic." Now, it was around that time too that we had, maybe a little bit after, that showed me if he didn't believe totally in God, he sure talked a lot about God. Okay, all right, and it told me that he definitely believed in Jesus's principles, you might say. Okay, because we had a discussion about the death penalty, and they asked me about the death penalty, and he says, "Dad, I don't believe in the death penalty." You know, this kid's like 17 years old. Like, I mean, you know, who the hell at 17 years old is thinking about the death penalty? Okay? But he does. Later on, that's which led him to write that poem, okay? But this is before the poem. We have this discussion. And it kind of turns into a debate, or almost a friendly argument, okay? Because I'm for the death penalty at that stage, okay? And he gets a little irritated with me. And I said, well, look, Danny, I said, okay, tell you what, you win. Because I said, they don't do the death penalty the right way. It really doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Okay, it's supposed to be a deterrent, but it really isn't. Okay, and I said, the real problem with it is, Danny, they don't kill them fast enough. Well, he got pretty pissed off at me. Even though I justified it, I explained it to him. I said, well, Danny, I mean, the thing is, it's supposed to be a deterrent. Okay. And yet the reality is they kill somebody 13 years later. Who the hell even knew who he killed? The neighborhood people don't know. You know, if you killed him in a year or 2 years, then maybe people in the neighborhood would say, oh, God, Johnny got killed for killing somebody. We better not kill. Okay.
Right.
But my son didn't buy that. He had some deeper religious anchor that at that time I did not have. Okay. Even though he said he was agnostic, he felt like we didn't have a right. And in fact, part of his poem said, new killers are born when we execute somebody. That was part of the words of his poem. And so later on, I found out he writes this poem, and I found out about some of his writing. So at his funeral, a couple of things happened. Number one, I write that in his eulogy, that as time goes by, I'll understand your writings more and more. Because his writings were really over my head. Okay? To reflect back on him, I understand what he was trying to say. Okay? And he was way ahead of me. He was way ahead of me. And I'll get you copies of all of his writings. It's incredible. Another thing that happened that day, dude, now remember I told you after his death, I got with his friends and I found out about his drug use. So at least I started to tell you about that. But at the funeral, I had another interesting thing happen. His friends came to me and said, Mr. Danny, we'd like to be pallbearers. We'd like to carry his coffin. And I said, I thought about it for a second. Now, at the time, I'm still not thinking about who killed Danny. And I'm not quite thinking about who to blame, you might say, who knew what he was doing, okay? But it's starting in the back of my head, it's okay? But I just ain't time to get to that, okay? But I do suspect some of these kids knew, and I didn't like that, okay? And so I said, well, no, not really. I said, I've got family members that are going to do it. And I said, but there is room for one friend. And that's why they all wanted it. Well, I gave it to a good friend of his who had helped me build the Mustang with Danny. And this was a friend that had came to me one time and said, look, Danny's smoking marijuana, okay? And I don't mind him smoking a joint every now and then. I wouldn't finish, but he's smoking too much, okay? And so I appreciated it. And I mean, Danny had to sit down and talk, and I think we really curtailed his use a little bit, okay? But I always admired that kid for that, okay? And the kid got a little chastised for that, okay? And so in any event, now after the funeral, I'll bring all these kids in to ask questions. And while I'm asking the questions on the use and what happened and who knew what, and, you know, and I'm doing this not just to punish them, I'm doing this to find out what the hell happened. How did this happen under my nose, okay? And one of the kids says, well, Mr. Danny, why didn't you let us carry the coffin? And I said, because you guys carried the coffin before he died. I know that's hard. And look, my son would have done exactly what they did. He would not have said anything. But one of the lessons that I want to come through with education-wise is when friends are using serious drugs, care, don't cover, okay? And if you think it's going to hurt your I don't know, the right word, your social interaction with people, okay? Do it anonymously. Drop a note in a parent's day. Drop a note in the school suggestion box. One of the things that I want to do when we're doing some of this education type of stuff that I'd like to push is I'd like to push a paradigm shift where people do start talking anonymously, where kids don't just do drugs, they become advocates about drugs. They want to protect their friends. They want to protect their school, okay? Lessons came learned out of that. Now, I have since forgiven my son's friends. We have a good relationship. One or two of them are actively involved with me in advocacy, okay? And so, but there's a great lesson learned in that, okay? So anyway, now I think we're through his funeral. Now the next stage is I got to go to the police department, okay? Because now all of a sudden I wasn't thinking about the killer. okay? And now all of a sudden, somebody at the end of the funeral, a good friend, comes up to me and hands me like a $2,000 check. And I said, what's this? They said, well, this is for the reward. And it was at that point that I really said, well, that's true. Somebody killed him. Okay. And so that started, and the first thing you know, we put together a $10,000 reward. And me and my wife go to the police station, and we sit down with some of their top executives in their office and whatnot. And we offer to pay overtime. We offer to put the reward money up. Okay. And, you know, naturally they start saying, well, you don't know how bad your son was. You don't know how bad his use was. And you know, but we're going to work the case. Don't rest assured that we.
Why would that matter to anyone? I mean, that's such an irrelevant thing to say.
Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you how bad it was. Okay. So in any event, we had actually, maybe they were a little aggravated with me because we went out the weekend after his funeral. You know, we cried and cried and cried, and I was so fed up with crying I couldn't cry anymore. So let's go out and do something. We made up posters, and I'm talking about just like the day or two after his funeral. It was a weekend. We called up the New Orleans Police Department. We asked them if they'd have a police call because we were going to go up there with family members in that neighborhood, and we were going to ask questions, try to find out about his death, his murder. And New Orleans said, well, we're too busy. We can't give you a call. So the parish adjoining was St. Bernard Parish. Okay, it's the neighboring parish, the parish we lived in. And I called them, and they said, we'll send a call. Even though it was out of their jurisdiction, they said, to hell with it. We're going to send a call. Well, naturally, in the long run, that kind of pissed off New Orleans. But I made the offer to New Orleans, okay? So we went up there that weekend, and we put a wreath up with him. We said a prayer. This was all televised. Some of this showed in the docuseries, okay? Sure. And we got media attention. We walked the neighborhoods. Believe it or not, we got a couple of clues that day that ultimately, I didn't know it at the time, what was related to his murder. Okay? And the witness watched us work. The witness who didn't live far from there and who I didn't discover for, I think, 9 months later, okay, she watched us. And in the long run, that added to her reason for coming forward. She saw how hard we worked. So working hard does count. And so back to the police now. I still, at this stage, have not given up on the police. I'm still thinking, well, okay, I'm going to take them at their word. They're going to try to do a decent job. Well, then I get a phone call from the place where he works, Pizza Hut, and it's the Pizza Hut manager. He worked part-time, delivered pizza at night, and went to school in the day. Okay, and they said, Mr. Danny, I don't know how to tell you this, but the police were here. I said, okay, I'm glad. I'm glad. You know, she said, no. She said, they only asked me one question. I said, what they asked you? How much was he stealing? And I said, well, what did you answer? She said, not a damn nickel. Kid was the best guy I had. So then I kind of jumped the police a little bit when they did that, okay? And they said, well, he's probably stealing from you. And I said, I don't think so. He said, well, you better check. And believe it or not, I started wondering, could he have been stealing from me? Sure. I guess I shouldn't be saying this online, but you know, I ran some apartments, okay, and I collected rents. And I always took a little bit on the side, like cash, okay? So we had like a little cash cow in the house, usually a couple $1,000, okay? And the kids knew it. And all they had to do was just sign their name and give a reason for why they took it, and it was okay. And of course, I would check it so often. So I went back home feeling kind of sick to the stomach. Mm-hmm. And I went and checked. We wasn't a penny short. And I started thinking, what am I dealing with these people? They're supposed to be investigating my son. Mm. And look, it got worse. Eventually I get a phone call in the middle of the night with a asshole sergeant that's telling me to butt out. My kid's a crackhead. He's a spoiled brat. You don't know what the hell you're doing. You're a pharmacist. I'm a great cop. I'll solve this thing. You just step out of my way. And by the way, if you go above me or below me, I will throw his case away. Mm. You know, yeah. The story is told in the docuseries, but there's a whole lot more that they could not get in, okay? And it got so bad that we finally got St. Bernard Parish was trying to help me a little bit with what was going on with the New Orleans Police Department. And so there was a St. Bernard policeman there that used to be a New Orleans cop. And so our sheriff down in St. Bernard, who was in the video, Jack Stevens was in the video, okay? And he sent this New Orleans police officer over there to try to bridge the gap that was going on between me and St. Bernard and New Orleans and all this kind of stuff. So, and we thought that might patch things up. In the meantime, I had never ever went above or below him because there was one good cop in here. He was a lieutenant, okay? He was above this bad sergeant. And the guy on the top, okay, was good friends with the sergeant. Okay? So the good guy was in the middle. Well, I would tell the good guy, say, well, look, I'll keep you up on what's going on and you can talk to me, but I'm not going to let the sergeant know you're talking to me because he was afraid that the guy was going to throw the case away. So I had to deal with this guy in the middle and I had to keep my mouth shut. Well, eventually I get tired of that and St. Bernard says, oh, that ain't going to work. They try to build a bridge. So we arrange a meeting. Now, but by the way, now, people ask me about why I recorded so much. Okay, let me explain that. Okay, I really didn't start off recording. Okay, it was one night shortly after this when we started having these brushes with the police that they finally allowed us to put the reward on. We had a press conference. And I went home, it's like 10 o'clock at night. And I didn't know this sergeant, who's the bad guy, existed. I had talked to his bosses, you might say. He was a night sergeant, okay? So I go home and I watch the TV and I see myself crying on the stage and offering a reward. And that's in the docuseries, okay? And because it was televised, okay? So anyway, I get home and I sit down on the sofa and the news is over with and I get a phone call. And it's this sergeant ranting and raving about, you know, your kid's a crackhead, he's a spoiled brat, he probably ripped the blacks off and, you know, and almost like he deserved what he got, you know, and don't go above me and don't go below me. Well, I was so fractured when I heard this, okay, that after I hung up, I sat down and I tried to write down everything he said. I still got the writings, okay? Mm-hmm. After that, I said, the bastards ain't gonna beat me again. Okay. After that, I started recording everything. Okay. I put a phone system in my house. I put a phone system in my car. I started carrying recorders. And that's where all this recording crap started. Okay. And ultimately, it helped me solve the case, but it also helps us tell the story now because we got some real time material of how I thought back then. And it morphed into, I was so high strung about this, and after they started pissing me off, okay, then it was not only a matter of solving a murder, it was a matter of beating the cops. Okay, they tell me I ain't gonna do it, I'm gonna do it. Okay.
They fueled the fire, right? So they're accusing you at a certain point of being like a crazy person, right? When the whole time they're throwing the fuel on you to make you obsess about. Yeah, they made you crazy. You know, that's, you know, I have my notes here, Dan, and I have like these questions, and I just have one word, crazy, right? Because I want to know, because I know that it's a theme that has come up throughout this process, right? And you're what you're doing today and what you're helping me with to help me to understand is they really made you crazy, right? It was more than this tragedy, right? Because that'll drive you crazy all within itself, right? Once you start to think, what about this and what about that and but they threw the fuel right on that fire. They made the Pharmacist. They made the Pharmacist, right? They made you a crazy man.
Ironically helped me solve the case. Wow. It's weird, but ironically they did. I don't know if I ever got so pissed off and so frustrated and so crazy. Right. Doing even dangerous things, okay? If they would not have provoked me that way and attacked my son that way, okay? He was not that kind of kid, okay? Mm-hmm. I don't think any of the addicts are, but this kid was a really special kid, okay? Yeah. You know, many kids don't get detentions or don't have fights, right. Okay? Not many are against the death penalty when they're 17 years old. you know. So any of that, so you're right. No, they just about drove me crazy, but ultimately it helped me solve the case. It really got worse. What I was getting ready to tell you is we had this meeting and we were supposed to try to patch things up. And it was the middle of the night meeting. Well, I don't trust this sergeant. I'm hoping that things are going to go good because this meeting has been set up by the higher ups, and there's a NOPD guy that goes with St. Bernard, and it's all set up. We arranged this meeting in the middle of the night, like 12 o'clock at night, because the sergeant doesn't come on till like 11 o'clock or something like this. And there's two things. We're supposed to go to this meeting, and the lieutenant now has approved the release of my son's belongings. For a little while, they were holding some of the belongings that he had in the truck, a little peace medal. In fact, this is the peace medal, okay, that he was wearing when he got shot. This is a picture of him when he was more like 17, 18 years old, okay? And so we hang that on here. And so they had a few articles, and they had been holding them because supposedly evidence, okay? Well, they finally got released. So that night we go there to have a meeting to reconcile and start over, okay? And we're going to get his personal belongings. Well, I don't trust this guy, and I've been recording everything, so my wife wears a wire. We in the 5th District Police Station now, 12 o'clock at night, we at the 5th District Police Station, 12 o'clock at night, and my wife is wearing a wire. She's got to go in the bathroom to turn it on. We go upstairs.
So they made her crazy too.
She went along, okay? But let me tell you, I probably drove her crazy too, okay? But she was a little more sane than me, but her sanity almost stopped me, okay?
Yeah.
She knew I could get killed, and then she'd lose her husband and her kids. It was tough, okay? It was just,
right.
I felt bad for her, okay? But I couldn't stop, okay? So any of that, but she's with me on certain things, okay? So she goes in the police, all nervous. She's wearing this wire, okay? And we sit down at this big table with 3 or 4 or 5 cops. The bad cop stands up and starts reaming my son in front of my wife now, okay? And he's saying, you went above me because that's why we're having a meeting, because I went above him, okay? Well, he starts ranting so much that she jumps across the table and starts hitting the son of a bitch. The recorder's on. It's a mess. You can barely hear what the hell's going on. It sounds like a mayhem. I got to grab her and pull her back. It was a mess. Okay, so any of that. We then, though, asked for his belongings. He wouldn't give his mother his peace medal. He wouldn't give his mother his peace medal. So anyway, we go downstairs and we sit downstairs. We said, we ain't leaving. When the sun rises, we're going to go talk to the superintendent of police. This is it. All right, I was trying to hold back because maybe it's going to hurt the case. I don't give a crap now, okay? Well, we sit there for about an hour or two, and finally some of his buddies talk him into having another meeting. He doesn't really apologize, but he acts a little bit more peaceful. He acts like he's going to give it a try, okay? And I think he would have lost his job on the spot because I had a recording of it, okay? And so, any event, which he still didn't know, by the way. So, any event, we semi-reconcile, but he still won't give the belongings back. So I call Lieutenant Ali the next morning, the good cop, okay? And he says, I got his belongings and I apologize. I'm sorry for what happened last night. I'm sorry, I just don't have control over this, okay? I understand if you go to the superintendent, whatever you think's best, Mr. Shneider, is fine with me. He was a guy that was trying to work with me and not have everything blow apart, and he was trying to save his own job.
Right.
And so we went along, and it was just a couple of nights later that the cop calls me, and this is in the video, okay? He calls me and says, in the middle of the night, he calls me and says, Mr. Shneider, and I think I'm half asleep. And he says, we found your son's killer. And I said, oh God, thank God, and I kind of start apologizing to the guy, like, oh, I'm sorry, you think can go the way they are. I'm so glad you got his killer, da-da-da. And he's bragging, okay? He's more or less sort of bragging about what's going on, okay, and whatnot. But I don't care now. If he's got my son's killer, mission accomplished. Okay.
Right.
Maybe it's a good thing I held off. Okay. and didn't blow everything apart.
Hey guys, Jim Wahlberg here from The Bottom Line. Listen, I just want to remind you, please make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page at Wall Street Productions. And I also want to remind you, push that little bell. Just push it, man. It takes 1 second. Then that will notify you when anything's going on with The Bottom Line. Thanks.